Welcome to the Alaska Defense Forum, and thanks for all that are being here with us, taking the time to be here with us today. My name is Randy Callsign Church-Key, Major General United States Air Force, retired. I'm the Executive Director of the Arctic Domain Awareness Center. It's a Department of Homeland Security Center of Excellence in Maritime Research, hosted by the University of Alaska. I'm down at University of Alaska Anchorage, but realistically, ADAC is a network that includes lots of research collaboration with the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and research nodes that extend from the west coast of the United States all the way to the east coast, and has extensive collaboration with Canada and the Nordic nations. We'll let our sound technical guy in the back there fix this evil noise. You got that? Okay, so strategically for us, this conversation today is a fireside chat. So kind of take the idea, pour yourself that extra cup of Joe and sit back and relax, and we're gonna have a conversation with two distinguished military leaders for the great state of Alaska and also the Arctic region. I have the privilege of welcoming to the Alaska Defense Forum the commander of Alaskan Command, Alaska NORAD region, and 11th Air Force, Lieutenant General David Krumm. Round of applause, please. As well as the Commissioner of the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs for the state of Alaska and the Adjutant General for the Alaska National Guard, Major General Torrence Saxe. In this fireside chat conversation, I have a few questions that we've got queued up as an opportunity for these two distinguished leaders, who, by the way, are highly searchable. You can Google them up and find all the remarkable backgrounds of experiences. The state of Alaska is so very fortunate to have these two distinguished leaders to be able to relate to you their reflections about Alaska defense operations activities from both an active duty side and also from a National Guard vantage point. Before we go to this conversation, I want to take a moment to pull the thread forward. In this conversation that you just heard that was queued up by Dr. Shrega at the Wilson Center, you all were ringside for a remarkable global strategic conversation. That kind of discussion, frankly, doesn't happen very easily. And so I want to take a special shout out because, by the way, I also work for him as one of his fellows, Dr. Mike Shrega and the Wilson Center, for a remarkable queue up for this conversation. So if you have given Mike a thanks, let's give him a big round of applause for doing that earlier.
Yeah.
So with all the kind of advertisements out of the way, I'm going to take a moment here and get back to my fireside chat. So kind of sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation. First of all, I'd like to give a kind of a welcoming set of reflections for both of you before I start going into the conversations. First, General Krumm, welcome to the conversation. Could you give these folks kind of an intro of how you're feeling today and how you see the conversation queuing up for what you do day to day, holding the thread for that strategic concepts that Dr. Shrega queued up?
That was a really hard question.
Well, I'll simplify it for you, sir.
So when church first came to me and said, let's have a fireside chat, I kind of had a vision in my mind of torches and pitchforks and as we started this. But I thought the discussion that we had earlier was a good framework for understanding where we are in the geopolitical world that we're facing right now. And what you're seeing by DoD is both a reaction and a strategy for getting after that new geopolitical world that we live in. And the things that we're doing in Alaska, in the Arctic, and elsewhere are informed by that. And we have a lot to do. And I think it's been amazing to watch over the last, I'd say, 18 months or so, where even in the midst of a pandemic, you've really seen the focus of our nation turn towards here, where they've said, hey, the Arctic is an area of consequence. We have national interest, we have security concerns, and we've got to put ourselves in a position where we are prepared for the future. And we continue to work on that, and I think it's an opportunity for us. You know, I'm kind of fond of saying we want the choices in the Arctic to be choices, not consequences. And so we want to plan and strategize and implement the things that we need to do as a nation to safeguard our interests, quite frankly, the world's interests, and do that in a matter of our time and choosing. And that means going forward with the things that we know that we need to do to get after that.
Joe Krumm, thank you for that. One thing, as we work through, by the way, the volumes, not to worry, we'll project so hopefully most folks can hear us. But strategically, a couple of thoughts I'd like to pull forward as a cue to the conversation for General Krumm. You may not know that day-to-day, General Krumm is the commander of 11th Air Force, Alaskan NORAD and Alaskan Command. He's responsible for keeping the watch. He defends through active duty forces and really a joint force as a senior military officer in Alaska. The approaches to the United States and Alaska from those folks that seek to challenge and potentially threaten our homeland. And his job, of course, is to maintain the watch, to be able to have forces ready to respond literally in a moment's notice to be able to defend our homeland, our airspace, and ultimately our safety and security. So this is a gentleman that he doesn't get to sleep much at night, but frankly, every moment he's always on the watch, even when he's taking a moment to rest. So this state, our safety and security, our defense needs are being met by Lieutenant General Krumm and his team, again, wearing 3 hats as the commander of Alaskan NORAD 11th Air Force and, of course, Alaskan Command. Strategically, though, his thoughts about the Department of Defense and what the Department of Defense is doing in the Arctic region also piggyback well for the Commissioner for the state of Alaska, Department of Military Veterans Affairs, and, of course, the Alaska National Guard. And this is Major General Saxe. So for General Saxe, he has just recently released an Alaskan organized militia strategy for the Arctic. And it's a pretty comprehensive document that complements the work that the Department of Defense is doing in the Arctic region. And so it's an opportunity for me to introduce General Saxe to the discussion here, to offer some of his reflections, again, as Alaska National Guard supports Homeland Defense, Homeland Security, and of course, being able to be that hand of help in times of need for disaster response. Again, we'll work through this evil.
Well, thanks, Church. Wow, that's loud. I will figure it out. This is the microphone that's doing all the damage, and if so, I can move. But I have not seen most of the folks here in about 2 years. It is wonderful to be back. And for those that were here 2 years ago, just a show of hands, how many people remember back to 04, 05 and the discussions we had about BRAC for Eielson? Oh, yeah. Anybody still have the T-shirts? They do tend to shrink in the closet, but hang on to them. But my point is, as far as Alaska is concerned, the conversations that we were having back then, we're still having, we're finally getting to the point where we're seeing that traction to go from potentially mothballs at Fort Greely to what we're doing with missile defense. Of course, the F-35 is coming in. If you haven't heard, now we're going to have an addition for KC-135s. There are so many positive things happening. We're not waiting to get to that point. We are at that point. We are seeing that traction that you're hearing about. And I cannot be more proud of the efforts that people in this audience have done and just my fellow Alaskans. It really is a big deal when you see how far that we have come in the past 20 years. That sound of freedom, that F-35, that is neat to hear. I know we still have the F-16s, but yes, the F-35 really is a big deal. Now, as mentioned, I am mainly the force provider, and we have a sizable force of about 4,000, but Alaska is very different than most states in that we have a very high percentage of full-time folks. You execute, I provide for you. But looking at Fort Greely, that's done almost 100% by guardsmen. Clear Space Force Station, I'm getting used to that myself. I was the commander there years ago. They are now called guardians, not airmen. So yes, even for myself, I'm getting used to that term as well. But going forward within the state, if you would ask me about 5 years ago, where are things likely going to happen? I would have told you most of the action was down in the Anchorage area. Now, most of the tangible things that are going forward really are in the interior. As mentioned, F-35, KC-135 addition, space station at Clear. There's going to be a direct connection now into Kodiak. I'm looking at putting some guardsmen out at Kodiak to help with the launches, to help with security as applicable. And certainly everything that's happening with Fort Greely with the addition of the interceptors coming in. This is the place within the state where things are happening. So that's what I do on the federal side. But to really shift gears to go on the state, something you may have heard me talk about before, rural operations. I am going out to all the large hubs within the state. We are going to places that in some cases we have not been for 30, 40, 50 years. I've tasked all my pilots to make sure they understand how to fly into every airfield that they can get into within the state. So we are pushing people out right now to Bethel, Nome, Kotzebue, for example, and I want to make sure, without going into any classifying, that should we be called upon on a federal role, we can get to these places, and certainly on a state side, for anything for natural disasters, we have guardsmen stationed there. We have these incredible facilities, just not enough folks to put in them. So I'm always the lead recruiter for the organization. We do have openings. I do want to get out there, but if you could please pass that on. I don't have a whole lot of cards with me today, but yes, we are recruiting. See a friendly recruiter. I think we actually have one here at the front table. And with that, just an example of how we are getting out to the communities. For folks in the room, if you are familiar with the term commissary run, this is something that we did years and years ago. We did it in Bethel, Nome, other places as well. I'm happy to say for the first time in about a decade, the goods were delivered yesterday, but we're going out to Bethel to deliver those goods to veterans, spouses, and everyone who's eligible for that. And yeah. Thank you. I'm very excited about that. But I cannot sit up here and talk about the importance of rural Alaska. I cannot talk about the importance of the interior if we don't do those tangible actions, and we're starting to do those. So rural operations, pushing out. I never want to introduce myself in a crisis. I do not want my team to do the same. They are going out ahead of time, making those connections. And I'm glad that we touched base about Kodiak, ma'am. Let's talk afterwards to make sure that we get that done as well.
Thank you. So, well, thanks. First of all, if anyone's interested in recruiting, go see the folks up front on the next break. And I'm sure, I'm looking at the crowd here with thinking most of you are getting past the recruitment age. So just in case.
We have age waivers.
There you go. Well, do you take old retired Air Force guys too?
Absolutely.
No. Okay.
Notice.
He says no, so I guess I'm stuck. So, well, thank you. And by the way, in a stand-up comedy routine, I want to be on stage with you. That's we'll be set. But now, keeping this on the professional, I'll bounce it back, because it's really important for most folks to realize that over the last number of months, many months now, the military services of the United States have worked heartily and productively to produce a number of Arctic strategies. The Department of the Air Force has released a strategy about a year ago this month. The U.S. Army just this few months ago released an Arctic strategy. The Department of the Navy has, of course, had several iterations of strategy. And the United States Coast Guard 2 years ago released an Arctic Strategic Outlook that built upon a previous strategy that they had. So all 6 military services are guided by some form of an Arctic strategy. Of course, with the Department of Defense forces, the 5 military forces within the Department of Defense, you're looking realistically now that there is an Office of Secretary of Defense DoD strategy that all these service strategies fall up under. So this is an opportunity for General Krumm to say, to offer his thoughts and his take on, as each of these, what is his take specifically on each of the services strategies and how this impacts you as you, of course, execute the missions that you have assigned, and your take on each of these strategies from your vantage point as an operational commander. General Krumm.
I think
Try this one.
it's working. I might just want to yell. But, okay. Thanks for giving me the bad mic. That was great, Church. So I think it's important for us to understand that the strategies that the services and DoD have put out are an acknowledgement of how important this region is. And it's a path for us to go down towards not only strategizing, but then operationalizing and implementing the things that we need to do to secure our interests up here. And when you look at the services, they're all a little bit different, and that's okay, because each of the services will have a different part to play up here. But all of them, I think, acknowledge the fact that we have to go forward with securing this area. And I think it's important for us to understand as well that that's going to take time, but it's also going to take effort. Effort in a tightening budget world, quite frankly. And I think as you look at the services, they acknowledge the importance of the Arctic, and they are looking for ways to put those resources and to put them in here. But it's going to take tough choices. And what we have to do as senior leaders is to make sure that our militaries are making those choices, and they're supported by our civilian leaders in Congress and the executive branch. I think that what you've seen in the last few years will be continued. When we talk about air power, the F-35s coming to Eielson have been a tremendous asset. General Saxe talked about we're going to add to our KC-135 structure here, both in aircraft and in personnel. There are plans on what do we need to do to secure our indications and warning for our long-range radar systems. There are things that we need to do to secure our coastal facilities. All of those will be a part of implementing the strategies that we need to get after. But I think it's important to have a strategy first so that we can implement it. And now the challenging part is going to be what do we need to do and where do we have to go for those resources? Because quite frankly, right now, we have to make choices. So the budget probably isn't going to get bigger. The importance of the Arctic is. And so where will we take those resources to implement them here? Those are going to be the tough choices ahead. I think there's going to be a pretty healthy dialogue and debate about where our country wants to secure that. And I'm optimistic that we'll make the right choice.
Thank you, sir. Sorry for giving you the bad mic. It was totally unintentional, but we'll keep working. That's actually very important for folks to realize that DoD doesn't have an unending stream of resources to tap, that there need to be priorities because so much of the strategies have aspirational goals. And as you look at many of these aspirational goals, prioritizing what matters most. And your input on behalf of course, the lead for Arctic Affairs for U.S. NORTHCOM, but ultimately as the operations commander who has watched for Alaska and really America's input into the Arctic region, your voice matters because you see the problem set much differently because you see it real world, real time right now, whereas the Pentagon sees it from a little more further distant vantage point. So I think it's important from our vantage point that hopefully the folks in DC, as they look to make those programmatic decisions, are listening to your wise and important and informed input on where these strategic documents, where do we need to put the resources as each of these work forward to the future. So that's critically important. And the confidence, of course, what the DoD is doing right now, today in the state of Alaska. So I'm going to bounce the note back over to General Saxe and kind of this Huntley-Brinkley approach, if you don't mind me. Most of the folks in this audience probably can have some resemblance to that remark or some remembrance of that remark. If you don't do that in university crowd, they'll just give you a blank stare, just so you know in advance. So General Saxe, from your vantage point, looking at the goals and the priorities of the Alaska National Guard with regard to your efforts in Arctic operations, can you kind of relate to the crowd here some of those goals and priorities from your vantage point as the commander of the Adjutant General of the state of Alaska?
Be happy to, but I think it's really important to fundamentally understand why we are doing what we are doing. Years ago, I was briefly enlisted in the Army, and I'm sure there's some Army vets out here, but I remember distinctly as the Smokey the Bear hat was in my face, and I read the patch that was in front of me. It said, "This will defend." I cannot think of a better mission statement for the National Guard, for the United States military. At the end of the day, we really do have that one job: protection and defense of the state and the nation. So that really is the foundation of our entire strategy going forward. Now, where it nests into what we're doing with ALCOM, with the DoD, et cetera, of course, we're not going to independently go off and make something that doesn't nest in those things. But one thing that we can absolutely provide is that rural in Arctic expertise. And I'll give you a quick example. I used to be the wing commander up at the 168th at Alaskan. And I remember in 2017, that was one of my last years here, I've got a little Toyota, and I was driving from my place that was by UAF out to Alaskan. It was 51 below ambient, and the only thing I could see on my windscreen was just this little area. So I had to put my seat all the way back, and I was driving down the ridge to get to work. When that transfers to what we do as far as warming up the aircraft, the KC-135 in particular, that is an old aircraft. It's going to be with us at least 100 years. 2060 is what I'm hearing for Air Mobility Command. It's amazing, 100 years at least. What you have to do when it is 40 below, the maintainers go out, and if they don't heat the aircraft appropriately, when the pilot steps onto the ladder, just getting onto the airplane to get into the cockpit, just the way of the pilot, that will crack the windshield. That is what we can do within the National Guard, the permanent party, to make sure that the folks coming into Alaska understand it really is different in the Arctic. It's not just 50 below, it's different at 20 below. There's not a whole lot of places in the lower 48 that routinely get to 20 below. That is one of my sincere goals. Second is establishing partnerships. Just the fact that I am up here with active duty and we're having a joint discussion, this is light years ahead of where we used to be. So I appreciate the opportunity to be on the same stage with active duty. We're all on the same team, just different positions. Those two things in particular, and as far as the capacity, the capability projection, as I talked about earlier, to go to the places within Alaska that we previously were at, have not been at for a long time, those are the things in particular, my strategy really does nest into the larger strategies. And just a quick word, yes, as mentioned several times, we do now have a state strategy. My team and the team really sitting here at the front table, they are now the core team working on a nationwide Arctic strategy for the entire National Guard. So we are really moving fast now and want to make sure that we are at the table with the active duty component and all the other states to make sure that there is a comprehensive strategy going forward.
General Saxe, thank you for that. That, from my vantage point, as you look towards the future in this regards, thinking about the importance of, for example, Arctic operations or just simply cold weather operations, aircraft operations and aircraft activities, it's really important to have that complement where folks who have the long, enduring, practical experience on the ground can help inform the value of associate relationships between active duty and the Guard to provide that long, deep understanding of how to do things when it is 40 below. It's a big deal. It's important for the continuity. The work that you're doing, of course, in realizing these goals and priorities, do you see right now, looking to the future, what are some of the unique capabilities the National Guard can offer to support active duty in things such as the activities in the Arctic region?
Well, as mentioned, anything that we're going to do that people really don't have the experience to go forward with, we are going forward with a SUSV, making sure that we have plenty of those to get to any area of Alaska. But just a little detail on what I'm doing with rural operations, and this is where it ties into both the Fed and the state side. If I can have a sizable contingent in every large rural hub, Kodiak, Nome, Kotzebue, on Alaska, for example, these are all the places that I'm trying very hard, yes, to recruit, but to fundamentally have people in position. Now, the way we can roll in with active duty, if there were to be an occasion where active duty had to get to, let's say, 4 deployed place within Alaska, they would have something to roll in on. That's where we can really do a good job, and I think that is our fundamental role going forward. We have so many untapped places within the state. I am a firm believer, I've thought this for years, we are way too focused on the road system. We have got to get out to all areas of Alaska, Northwest, the Aleutians, Southeast, and that's my fundamental push to make sure that this is all the state, not just a portion of the state.
It makes good sense. Well, speaking of getting out to the communities, I think it's an opportunity for both you, General Krumm, and you, General Saxe, to offer some reflections about working with the community. One of the things that Mayor Ward and Ms. Smart too has been, by the way, a shout out to Brittany, who is all things to this activity today, Alaska Defense Forum. Woo! So what Brittany asked me to ask you all, okay, let me break it down very simply, is that how do you ask the folks in the Alaska Defense Forum how can they help? So when I think about pivoting this now conversation to you, General Krumm, these Arctic strategies are all in the business of being resourced. And of course, the need for prioritization continues, but they're underway and being resourced and being implemented. General Krumm, from your vantage point, how do you see the community partnering with DoD in this aspect? How does the community partner with DoD to help implement these Arctic strategies?
So a few thoughts. And first, I'll go back to what is it that we need to do. When we talk about where we are going here in the Arctic, when you look at all the strategies, they talk about allies and partners. They talk about multi-domain awareness. They talk about communications. And they talk about presence. So we know that in the future, we're going to be working more with our allies and partners. That includes the Alaskan Natives, it includes the state, it includes our European allies, and obviously Canada. But we know that we're going to have to put in a system of multi-domain awareness so we know what's going on from the seafloor all the way up into space. That's going to require investment. That's going to require presence. We know that we're going to have to work on communications. And we're working with, quite frankly, civilian agencies. We're looking at OneWeb and SpaceX and some of the comms that they will be able to provide from low Earth orbit satellites. And we're looking at what do we do as well. Because I think it's important that we have to understand we can't be temporary in our presence to safeguard our national interests. We have to be able to be here, and we have to not just survive, but we have to thrive up here in this region. That's going to require us to move resources and come into the communities. And, you know, I'll go back to something that Tori's talked about. All those BRAC T-shirts, I think you can hermetically seal them and put them away. That is... I can't foresee a future where we are not actively engaged up here. And so we need to move forward together in trust and a partnership. And that includes us being very transparent with where we want to invest and where we want to bring service members and their families, and a partnership with the community that is prepared for the arrival of that capability of those service members and their families. You know, we, in the Air Force, we enacted a strategy of preparing for the F-35s. We built hangars, we built shelters, we built all the things that were necessary for the aircraft to be able to do their operational mission, and we'll continue to do that. We didn't bring them here until we were ready. The same goes for the service members and their families. As we bring them up here, we need things to be prepared for them before they arrive. And in many cases, that requires us working with the community. You know, I can't build extra public schools. You know, I can't build a sewer system. I need help with the community in preparing the environment so that we can bring those families and they can be a part of the community. And that's, I think, going to be an important role for us going forward as we implement these strategies is, are we able to work together, you know, we call it OPE, Operational Preparation of the Environment, to make sure that we're all ready. We realize it's a finite amount of resources and a kind of a zero-sum game. The Arctic is opening and it's expanding, but it's still kind of tough to work here, and it's tough to bring supplies in. We know that that finite amount of resources requires prioritization as well inside the community. And we need to be as helpful as we can with the predictions of what we're going to do and then follow through on them. And so I would just say, Church, that the community relationship that we have is very, very strong. There is nowhere you can go in the state of Alaska where we don't feel the love, the support, and Alaska brings it in spades. We have to make sure that we continue that in not just the show of support, but also how do we work together on building the things that our service members and their families need so that we can implement the missions that we know we need to do.
Thank you. I tell you, General, that's for the community here today, hopefully you'll take that as a significant takeaway. There is a tremendous capability. You fought hard to get those F-35s. You fought hard for infrastructure for the state of Alaska, particularly in the interior region. Now that has been won, that contest, if you will, quest that you're upon, has actually been realized very significantly. Now the follow-through is underway, and General Krumm, as the operational commander, can move forward significantly to make the capabilities realized as far as the operations side. The care for families, care for support is truly critical and truly important. There's a tag team on this that I want to just link back to General Saxe on, because one thing is several of us in this forum today, including myself, I have the privilege of serving as the co-chair of the Alaskan Civilian Armed Services Team, ACAST. It's the Governor Advisory Board that's focused on military and security matters, specifically oriented to those things that what community support provides support of the military. We in ACAST provide advice through the Commissioner, Department of Military Veterans Affairs, to the Governor, the Office of the Governor, on military matters, and specifically relates to base relations, community relations to the military. And there are several aspects that really I can piggyback off of General Krumm's remarks here. This is, for example, professional licensure for spouses. This is an issue that's been discussed at length over years in Juneau to try to help provide supporting licensure, as other states have done, to provide support to spouses of military members as they come to the state. So coming to Alaska is not a financial hardship to the family, because both the military member and the spouse can professionally advance their careers. So from our vantage point, one of the takeaways is just pulling that thread forward from General Krumm is you can help him by putting issues like that forward that better take care of the spouses so that they find professional advantage, not disadvantage, from joining their spouse in a military tour in Alaska. That was a free advertisement I didn't even plan on until just now. So
Good job.
So now back to you, General Saxe. Sorry, I got off track, but we'll come back. General Saxe, as you look right now, obviously you work with agencies and organizations. The Alaskan National Guard does, working in cooperation to help support its Arctic strategy. Can you describe a little bit about those other agencies and organizations that you are working with to really help support your Arctic strategy?
Well, Church, you mentioned one, ACAS, for example. That is a good one. But just an overarching comment, the military has changed because society has changed a bit. Now, I look back when I first came in the military, there was very much a distinct separation between the military community and civilian community. I think that has interwoven quite a bit over the past 20 to 30 years. Just by the fact that we're having this forum, that speaks volumes. I'll give you an example. About 3 years ago, I went out to Bethel, and it was my first time out there, at least in this role. And I sat down with some tribal leaders, and we discussed some things. They had some very valid concerns. So by and large, I folded my hands, and I listened for quite a while and let them tell me what they wanted to tell me. I went back in about 3 or 4 months, and I saw one of the people that I was talking to. I was getting out of the car pretty close to the river, and I put out my hand and said, "Hey, great to see you." And he said, "You put that away." I was like, "Oh, this could go kind of bad." And he came up to me and gave me a hug. That's what I'm trying to do as far as the organizations within the state. It doesn't necessarily have to be a hug, but there has to be that respect. You have to get out and you have to talk to people to get the ideas. My point being, even with the conversations I've had today, there are a lot of very good, valid ideas that should and can be executed within the state. If I were to sit just within my office or even with the narrow organizations that we have, I think they're good, but they're incomplete. The more you can get out and you can talk to people and take those questions and have town halls, that's what I try to do every single place I go. I'll have a presentation, but then I'll sit and I will take input. I will have my staff with me. We will take notes and we will get back with that person. Whether that idea can be implemented or not, we'll see. But there have been a lot of good ideas even recently that finally, as we're starting to come out of COVID, that we can go forward and take that input. And Alaska fundamentally is different. We have 10 times the number of veterans as any other state. Just a show of hands, how many are veterans here in the audience?
Yeah.
So thank you for your service. We would not be here without what you have done. But at its core, that's what we're doing within the state.
General Saxe, that totally makes sense. And from my vantage point, we can't be successful because at the end of the day, Alaska is one great big little town. Everybody knows everybody. It's one great big family.
I agree.
Alaska, of course, makes the United States an Arctic nation. All of Alaska is not the Arctic, but all of Alaska has an Arctic orientation. Most of Alaska, anyway, has an Arctic orientation. Certainly, Alaska is America's entry point into the Arctic region. And of course, when you look at Arctic operations, it is a pan-Arctic. You know, if I call the aspect of expanding circles, Alaska, the North American Arctic, which includes, of course, the dearest of allies and partners, our friends to the east as opposed to the north in Canada, but also includes the transatlantic Arctic link. Dr. Shrega really hit on quite nicely bringing that transatlantic Arctic focus forward in his previous discussion that he'd queued up on the geostrategic aspects. When we look to today in Alaska, as Alaska continues to be America's salient into the Arctic, there's things that need to be done in thinking from an Alaskan vantage point, working with other National Guards. I know that there is an Arctic Interest Council, if I got the terminology correct, General Saxe. But I'd like to kind of ask you your thoughts, what these other states are doing in concert with your efforts in the Alaska National Guard when they work together on enhancing the Guard's efforts in and around the Arctic region.
As far as coming up here, because they do not live in the Arctic, what we are fundamentally getting towards is them coming up here to learn from our expertise. So that could be something simple as far as how do you function at 40 below, how do you fly at 40 below, but looking forward, this really is the first concerted effort to get people to come to the state. Now, taking a little bit more locally, most of our annual training is now, it's mandatory per my direction, is going to be done here within the state. I was looking at some of the training that was happening, and if you're going to get good at Arctic operations, you've got to do it in the cold. You've really got to get out there, and there's no other way around it. So the Cool School, inviting people from other states to go to our schools to learn just how to do the various operations that they would be required to do. I think fundamentally this is going to be a good thing because when you have not just Alaska but other National Guards that can come up in the winter and do their operations to learn what needs to be done rather than just talking about it over Zoom or on PowerPoint, there's no substitute for that Arctic experience. So that should be starting without question as early as this winter.
That's a very fair remark. Ultimately, if you don't feel the Arctic, you don't really understand the Arctic, and you got to feel the bite of the Arctic in order, and realistically, Alaska, you got to feel that bite to get the real context of what it really, how difficult and challenging it is to safely operate. As I'm looking through the unfortunate fact that time moves on far too quickly when you have an opportunity for this kind of conversation, I realize we're getting close to conversation ending. So we do, of course, can't get in the way of our congressional delegations getting ready to take the stage electronically for us here in a moment. But I'd like to give an opportunity for both these distinguished leaders to provide any kind of closing reflections, any specific areas of takeaway they'd like you to think about as they conclude the remarks in this time of chat with you today. Starting with, of course, General Krumm, kind of your reflections and takeaways and what you want this audience to remember after we depart the stage.
There's a lot that goes on when we talk about the different implications that the new world is bringing. But do not be fooled in any way. You are an essential part of our nation's strategy to protecting its interest, both here and globally. Alaska is the most strategic place in the world. I really firmly believe that, and there's a reason that we have the assets that we have here. And your support and your help in what you do makes a difference. And it makes a difference in the lives of our airmen, soldiers, sailors, Marines, Coast Guardsmen. And because of what you do and the support that you give them, they can focus on that mission. And so when we talk about the geopolitical landscape, when we talk about competitors, when we talk about other countries that aren't looking out for our national interests, the way that you are a part of it is like what we're doing today, getting together, talking about ways we can move forward, ways that we can partner together so that we can make it better. And so I am very, very grateful for each and every one of you and the importance you've shown by coming here today, but what you do every day as well. And we're here to partner with you every minute of every day going forward. And make no mistake, when you look in the mirror every day, you're a part of the solution. And the works and the support that you give us, they've made the difference. So thanks.
Saxe, your thoughts?
Every strategy, every meeting, every get-together should fundamentally have one purpose, and that is the protection and the defense of this state and this nation. And I know that's the purpose of today at its core as well. Just to take you quickly back, about 20 years ago, I was stationed at Clear, and it was a really cold winter, averaging between 35 and 55 below for quite some time. I was a captain. I had a young airman come up to me and had just a basic question: "Sir, why am I here?" And you can take that a whole bunch of different ways, and I knew what he was getting at, and I said, well, first off, you're here like I am because we follow orders. You're in the United States Air Force, and that's what we do. But secondly, you're here for that protection and defense, not just of Alaska, but of North America. That is what we do, and that's why we're here today. And the fact that you're here giving input, showing interest, I could not be more proud to be here. Again, it's been a while. We weren't here because of COVID last year, but this community cares. This state cares, and it's becoming on us. We need to take that input and make sure that we're not operating in a vacuum. So as I look across the audience and just the familiar faces I see, I hope we can connect later on, but your passion is evident, and we'll take that passion, we'll go forward for the protection and defense of Alaska and the nation.
General Krumm, General Saxe, thank you for the strategic reflections, for your candor, for your willingness to offer some personal insights. It's an opportunity for us to help communicate in a way to a group of people who do care deeply. One opportunity, today is not an end of itself. There is an opportunity for those who are so interested. We've sent the date out to as far a network as I could possibly manage on behalf of Alaskan Command, on behalf of General Krumm and his staff, for the upcoming Alaskan Command Arctic Symposium. It's going to be conducted the 30th of November through the 3rd of December, a lovely 3.5-day adventure in all things Arctic. It's going to be conducted in Anchorage, again, the 30th of November through the 3rd of December, a 3.5-day event. If you're so interested in this, you can see me, or you can send me an email at rakee@alaska.edu. Happily to help queue you up to that conversation. It'll be a remarkable event that brings together the community of research, military leaders, the Alaska Native community, our allies and partners, and more. So please take the time to take a look at that. If you want to know more, just send me an email, as I just articulated. So with that in mind, no more commercials. Now I'd like to take an opportunity. Could we offer these distinguished leaders a warm round of applause?